For more on this, we are now joined by Professor of International Relations at Wits University, Professor John Stremlau, and he joins us via a Zoom link. And he will be discussing with us the BRICS member countries meeting over challenges facing the world. Professor, it's always a pleasure talking to you here on the late edition. Perhaps let's start here. We've seen that meeting taking place today in Johannesburg with the security advisors. One thing that seems to have come out from the discussions taking place today, clearly security taking center stage.
Yes, that's appropriate. And I'm very, very glad that you led with Wang Li, the National Security Advisor to President Xi of China, because he is critical, as is China critical, to any solution of the Ukraine-Russia war, but also because China has been a country since 1532 BC. It is a civilization nation, and it's now catching up to the United States in its gross national product. It's about $17 trillion compared to the US, which is $23 trillion. And although the Chinese economy is slowing, the Chinese have an enormously important role to play in guaranteeing the security. And in the case of Africa, which is, of course, what President Ramaphosa wants to focus on at this August summit of the BRICS, and he's invited all of the African countries to participate. And I'm sure that of the 45 national security advisors who are here for this week's meetings, there's a lot of representation from Africa. African security is complicated because they don't have conflicts between or among countries. That's the order that the OAU and the African Union helped put in place. But there is a lot of conflict within countries, and it's exacerbated by the grain embargo, which was ended by the Russians last week and is causing enormous concern on the continent. So that's the appropriate subject for this meeting is obviously security.
Yeah, something that also came out there, and the editor here at the SABC News for International News, Sophie Mokoena, trying to get out of the minister in the presidency, but continuing to be mum, is the issue around the expansion of BRICS members. Of course, even leading up to this meeting, this was something that was spoken about. Do you expect that there will be some sort of signing? Will we be seeing more members joining BRICS?
I think that BRICS should be expanded, as the Security Council should be expanded, and the security advisors were mouthing generalities that we all can embrace. But in the immediate concern is not expansion. You can't imagine who would be included. Is Indonesia, a democracy, going to be included? It's a very large economy. But then if you look at Africa, is Nigeria going to be expanded? It's a very large economy, but South Africa is the member of BRICS, and South Africa is only 2% of the BRICS global product. There are giants there right now in the original BRIC of India, Brazil, China, and Russia, which is the second smallest economy. It's only 1.8 trillion compared to the 18 trillion of China. And so the real immediate issue is getting the grain flowing to Africa and getting the end of this conflict that has been started by the Russians back in February 2022. And if Africa cannot be united in its view of the fact that sovereignty and territorial integrity have been violated, what can they do in separate and conflicted ideas? And we know that Africa is divided on this issue because only 51% of the African members, of 54 members of the African Union that belong to the United Nations, actually condemned the invasion. But it was a majority. but it was a very slim majority, and 81% of the members of the UN have condemned the invasion. And so somehow the Chinese are critical for putting pressure on Russia. The West can put pressure on Ukraine, and let's get this war over.
And because of that war, Professor, we also know that the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, will now be attending the BRICS summit, virtually. What do you make of him actually attending this BRICS, this very all-important BRICS summit virtually?
I think it would be impossible for him to attend because he's suffered some defeats. Most notably, Prigozhin and the Wagner Group turned on him a couple of weeks ago, and he's got security concerns with Russia, with Ukraine, because he thought it would be an easy victory, and we all did too. I mean, I did. I thought they would be a walk through Ukraine, but Ukraine's self-determination, the help from the West, which came reluctantly, but did come, because after all, Crimea was annexed and the eastern provinces annexed back in 2014. So Putin thought he could get away with this, and he's proven to be not able to consummate the victory. And so somehow we've got to lean on these warriors to abandon their pursuits. But Putin was not going to come, I didn't think, to South Africa because he couldn't afford to be out of the country. I mean, he has to worry about his own security, for heaven's sakes.
And at the same time, we know that a delegation from South Africa, including President Cyril Ramaphosa, is making their way to St. Petersburg for the Russia-Africa summit. What do you make of the timing of this summit? Of course, taking place just following that announcement that Putin will now be joining virtually. And at the same time, those developments coming out of South Africa, and now President Cyril Ramaphosa meeting with Putin.
Well, I think it's good that President Ramaphosa is going, and he conveyed the dismay of African states for last week's abandonment of the grain agreement that brought 33 million metric tons of grain to Africa. The Horn of Africa is suffering grievously because of the drought, and so we need this grain and we need the fertilizer. Putin will say that, well, the sanctions are hurting the fertilizer trade, and undoubtedly they are. But the sanctions are also meant to signal to Putin that he's increasingly isolated. And so for President Ramaphosa to go now is probably a useful thing to do. But don't forget that Africa is a very small player in this big game of global politics right now, where China and America need to get in sync and try to help broker a peace agreement, which seems very elusive at the moment, because Putin is bombing Odessa, and Odessa means an awful lot to some ANC members down here, like Ronnie Kasrils, who was trained there in 1964. So there is a personal dimension to this, which is goes back many years, and the effects of the bombing on Odessa are immediate and very alarming to African states. And so I think the Africans should go to St. Petersburg and tell the Russians that they've got to find a way to get more grain. I know Putin is saying that he will give more grain to Africa, but he promised in the 2019 summit to double aid to Africa, and it's been reduced. So he's only been to Africa once in 20 years of presidency of Russia.
All right, Professor Stremlau, unfortunately, we've run out of time. Thank you so much for your contributions. That is Professor John Stremlau from Wits University, and of course, a professor in international relations.